thing that I love to do, and that's to feed people. And so I brought you ritual food, which we'll eat after I finish talking to you. So it's not meant to be food. It's meant to be just a picture of food, but it's all full of health and as few radically dangerous items as possible. Just mainly apple juice. And that seems to me a nice Western tradition, since our whole lives begin with that fatal apple. So we have some apple juice and some popcorn. Popcorn, of course, is such a marvelous, weird thing, and just a great joy. And it's always nice to think that if we didn't live at this time, if we lived at, 300 years ago, we never would have had popcorn. Terrible thought. So we have popcorn to emphasize our existence in the actual moment in America and in Western civilization. So I had a lot of fun this week summarizing everything that I've said to you so far in one glorious sentence. And it won't mean anything to people who didn't hear the other two lectures. But it won't mean, I trust anyway, that it will mean something to the people who did hear the other two lectures. And it is that I believe, Credo, that we are incarnate beings inhabiting a unique body that is so severely limited that our experiences are shared with every human being that ever lived. And the things which the body requires, sleeping and eating and working in order to eat and eliminating, are things that we share with Socrates and Pharaoh and Henry Ford and every single person we meet. You see, there's never any question but what you can ask somebody, did you sleep well? And they're kind of interested too. They're interested if they slept wonderfully. Then they tell you they slept just like a log from like 12 hours. And then otherwise, of course, if they have insomnia, that's a whole dramatic event that can be endlessly dragged out. And I think eating has some of the same qualities. So these things bind us together. They just bind us to every single human being ever in the world that ever did live. And we know that deeply in our own sakes, in our own deepest part of our nature. And we also know the snowflake principle, that we're absolutely unique. We never occurred before, we never will occur again. Every single thing in the world, I believe, and remember that this is only an article of faith because nobody can see whether it's true or not. My great vision of the snowfall every 500 years that's identical to the one that was 500 years before, with exactly the same snowflakes, and nobody ever could know it, you see, ever could know it. So it's a nice thing to think of, you see. It's such an aberrance, it's such a marvelous aberrance to think of. And of course we don't, it's like a toy we can play with. And of course, our limits, against which we are constantly fighting and trying always to make, to enlarge them, and to make it possible for us to be more, and our bodies to be more, and every part of us to be more than we were before. And this is something which all human beings have always shared. I mean, it's another thing, that deep sense that we are in some way born for something much larger than what we actually have to confront. And with that, I cannot emphasize to you enough how firmly I believe that every single human being must make something, does continually make something, and is perfectly miserable unless they can. Fortunately, they always can. I mean, I remember years ago seeing something that touched me so that I've never forgotten it. And it was pictures of something which a psychotic woman who had never said a word to anybody for 50 years. And under the sheets at night, in her bed, she made little figures out of strips of cloth and Kleenex and all kinds of little things. And extraordinary, they were photographed. And just they were blind looking, you know, they were just little rats of things, but you could feel that what she was doing, what she had done, was making something which some way gave her that movement out of herself that is simply what we live for. We live to lose ourselves in something, whatever it may be. We try all kinds of things. To lose ourselves and yet to be able to come back to ourselves, because we, of course, exactly as we feel about our bodies, we love ourselves no matter how disappointing they are. We are to ourselves. And so it's always a double movement backward and forward. And the quality of making, I believe, is enormously valuable to us because it involves choice. You see, and choice is one of the things that gives us greatest joy, to have to make choices. It's also the most poignant, the most terrible thing that we ever have to do, is to make a choice. But it's also the most joyous, so that it's a double thing. There's nothing more satisfactory, you see, than making a choice. And yet, at the same time, what a choice means is that you cut off something else, you've lost something else. So every choice is a sacrifice. See, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's the color of lipstick, you know, or the shirt you're going to wear, or anything. You have to choose it. And in order to make anything in the world, you have to make choices. That's what an object that you see in the world has been the result of choices that somebody made. And that these choices always involve the greatest possibility and the greatest anguish, but the great satisfaction. And satisfaction, I think, comes from the fact that all choices mean the expression of value. You say, this is better than that. This is what I want, not that. I want this thing. This is better, finer, truer, whatever it is that you're making, you see. That you feel that this is the direction, and you have a moment, you see, of always of wondering, and it's true of these chairs that you're sitting on, it's true of this thing. See, somebody drew this. Somebody actually drew a picture of this before it could be made, before it was made. And that involved all kinds of choices. And then what does choice reveal? See, choice reveals your values, and your values are the way people judge you. It can't be any other way. See, we see that this person has this kind of values. I don't think much of the person who made this, you know, I really don't. I don't think he or she was straining his or her imagination in the slightest, and had absolutely no concern, you see, not thinking at all what it might be, but only thinking what it'll do to me. And so here it is, you know, it's really an undistinguished thing. If, however, you saw it in 500 years or 5,000, you'd be quite intrigued by it, maybe. Or on a pedestal, you'd look at it anyway. But you see, everything is like that. Your shoes, you know, somebody drew your shoes, and your eyeglasses, and just every single thing. And they drew it saying, I want it to be like this, not like this. And when anybody is making anything, all they have in their mind always is, I want to make it right. And I'll work till it's right. And that right may be very limited, you know, very, in a sense, easier than anything else. But that's what we work towards. And that's the basis that everybody does. Action making. It may be right to fool people. It may be right that it isn't what it seems to be. It may be the person making it may say, this will work, this will work, and this won't. And it won't because I don't believe in this or something. So that you have you have a continuous making of choices. And it's exciting and exhilarating. It's the same exact reason, you know, that we like to go down the street and go from window shop to window shop. You see, the great joy of window shopping, or of actually going in and trying on things, is that you you exercise choice. You can stay, and it's such a marvelous and exhilarating thing, particularly if it's a terribly expensive shop and the things are, a dress or a little skirt is $2,000, and you can look at it and say, well, I don't think it's very good. Life offers very few things more exhilarating than that. I mean, it just, because there you see, what are you doing? You're affirming your taste, and your taste is yourself, against enormous amounts of money. A lot of other people that think that's really splendid, and I wish I had it, some poor souls who are saving up to buy it. And you see, you just, your values are, you exercise it, you drop them out like a dog, and it's a marvelous, marvelous feeling. And of course, if you're making something, you do the same thing, only it's failed. I mean, then the thing will be there when you finish, It isn't that wonderful carefree joy of judging, of making judgments which are not going to really be affecting anything very much. And the thing that is so extraordinary is that our very limits, the limits of the fact of our uniqueness and the limits of the world that we live in and the limits of our body, all give us power. They give us some kind of sense of power. And the things which people at the present time have so much difficulty, really, I think, understanding, is that if there is a strong tradition, that this allows for enormously more variety than if there isn't. Because it's something that can play off against the tradition. Now, you see, if you're going to make something, and the tradition is so strong that you already have certain choices made for you. So if you're going to make a chair, and you belong to a strong tradition that knows what a chair ought to look like, then your making of that does away with a whole lot of choices, early choices, but it concentrates the choices which you do have to make, because you always do have to make them. And you make them with your whole self, as you make choices anyway, and you also mark them with yourself. See, nothing has ever been made that is identical to anything else. And what you make, you mark with your own nature, with your own values, with the things that made you say, I go this way, not that way. I go to do this, not that. And the things which you do decide, where your choices always have to come in, are much subtler and reveal much more, and have a greater quality of really of anguish, because the big things are decided, you see, and then the smaller things are where the great problem is, and the smaller things are where the excitement is, and where the fullest sense of yourself is. Because those are the things that you make, the others are the things which you embrace, but which you don't have to worry about. So it has an extraordinary effect, and it's something that you can see very easily in the history of art, because you can see how something is a very powerful tradition, for instance, and each person in it takes as much as they can from that tradition. That is, they just inevitably do, because it is a tradition, and it sustains and supports them and answers large questions. And then when the tiny thing comes, it is so completely you, and then it has a far greater power. It feels to you far more powerful than it would if there isn't any such thing. And I want to show you tonight. Let's look at some slides. We didn't get a little thing, did we, to make it for me to change it? No, too bad. We live in a technological society that always collapses if you talk about art. I think it's jealous, and the machines are jealous. Now, I want to show you, of course, one of the strongest traditions that all of us are perfectly familiar with, and of course, perfectly capable of understanding something about it. Any strong tradition is really sort of like a language, and you can learn to speak it. Any strong cultural act is like a special kind of language, which other people can learn. And if the language is a good language, they learn it pretty easily and pretty joyfully. They may always speak it with an accent. I remember the efforts when I was in Germany one time of a dance band to play jazz. And you could hear the soldiers' feet walking through it all the time. You know, but they could only hear the kind of military quality that jazz doesn't have, you know, but they could only hear that. And so it was a terribly funny thing to try to dance to. It was very, and of course this is always true, I'm sure that it's true in anything that where you speak the cultural language with a heavy accent. And of course, if you have a strong culture, you're bound to speak anybody else's culture with a heavy accent, and they did, and they do. The Chinese are so familiar, Chinese and Japanese are so familiar to all of us, and have been, of course, so much admired ever since the 18th century or the 17th century, that you can recognize what it is. And you could, of course, you can in a way speak it. That is, you could judge it and even make things which are with it, because it's perfectly clear. The tradition itself has a strong dependence on, and really is a type of writing. The highest art in the art end is calligraphy, to being able to write beautifully, and everything expressively and so on. But everything that you see here was learned. The image of a mountain was taught people how you make a mountain, how you make a tree, how you make water. And people begin to learn that about absolutely familiar and well-learned objects when they're little children. That is, when they're going to start to write, because you use the same instrument, you use the brush, you see, that you use if you were writing. But these things are practiced until you get exactly right what it is that you're supposed to do, what this mountain should look like, what the tree should look like, what all these things should look like. It's like words. It's like learning words. You learn the image that you're going to use the rest of your life. But then what does it mean? See, it means that the judgment of the work. Let's look at the next slide just to see it. The judgment of the work by the people in the same tradition who judge it not, first of all, about how exactly you've learned this image, how precisely and exactly you've learned it, and secondly, how you have been able to suffuse it with a life which is beyond you. You see, when you paint in ink in China or in Japan, you sit down to do it. And why do you sit down? So that your body doesn't interfere. See, it's so that it's exactly the same thing that allows us at the theater to totally lose ourselves, or to move. Because our bodies aren't saying, I'm getting tired, or let's move, or anything like that. We are able to lose ourselves if we can forget ourselves, if we can not have ourselves pushing at us all the time. And if you're sitting down, and then what you do is you try to see that the thing which is the life impulse uses you as a medium. You don't use it, and you don't use yourself. So that you have exactly the same thing in making something that you have in enjoying something. That you lose yourself in making it. That is, you actually, it's an act of will, it's an act of spiritual power to obliterate yourself in order for the life force to move into the images which you make, to create the images. Your hands know it. It's exactly the same thing as when you play the piano. You see, if your hands don't know what to do, without your having to think about them, then you can't ever express anything. You can't allow the music to speak through. Because you have not to have the blundering, heavy, demanding body saying, I can't go that fast, you see. I can't do that well. And instead, it has to be so trained that it allows music to come through. It allows the music to exist. And because it goes through your unique imagination, it's colored by what you are. So that this is the thing which is most admired. This is the thing which all of Oriental art aims toward. Nothing to do with any kind of idea of self-expression, you see, but the opposite. That the enormous spiritual gift of subduing yourself or obliterating yourself and allowing something larger to come through. Let's look at the next one. As a result of that, in China and in Japan, if you could so study a painter who lived 300-400 years before, that you could so submerge yourself in his images, which are of course shared with you, that this was the greatest thing that you could do. And if you did it really well, you could sign his name. See, it's exactly the opposite of our sense of forgery. It's exactly the opposite. Because if you signed your name, it became valuable in the same way that his is. Because what does that mean? See, it means that you were able to so comprehend what it was like to do that, that you do it. There's a wonderful story. I can never resist telling people when I'm thinking along these lines. It's a parable, I guess, about a very powerful great sultan who had the problem of having two marvelous chefs who were really not chefs, but who ran the palace, who were both one was a chef, one was the assistant one, and they arranged everything. And so he said, well, we'll have a competition, and this one can put on the most magnificent feast that he can imagine, and then the other one will put on one and we'll judge. So the one puts on this incredible feast of everything. It's just utterly delicious. All the people are beautiful, magnificently dressed. The music is simply divine. Everything about it is perfect. The conversation is witty, and everything is just a perfection itself. And of course, everybody thought, well, he's going to win. So the next night, when the other one did, he did an exact duplicate. The people were all beautiful, wearing exactly the same thing, spoke wonderfully, entertaining conversation, exactly the same as before. The music was exactly the same. The food was exactly the same. There was no way that you could tell the difference. And the Sultan chose him. Why? Because to receive, to understand something so perfectly that you can do it is far more difficult. 1,000 million times more difficult. Because again, we intrude, you see, ourselves intrude. And this required the loss of self. And so that to be able to do that, it was to be able to perfectly know what had been done. You couldn't have done it otherwise. You had to know perfectly what had been done. And what is great about it is, of course, that this is almost impossible. It's almost impossible to do. It's far. You see, we never have to worry about whether we're unique, because just think of the snowflakes, the grains of sand, and so on. And you never have to worry. And you should never bring that as a judgment, of course. You say, oh, I like that, it's so unique. Well, what isn't? You have you've got to, or it's so original. Every one of us is an original in this room. We're an absolute original. And whatever we do is an absolute original. Doesn't make any difference. There's no way we can avoid it. That's the thing, except by an enormous effort. And actually, you see it with great sacrifice, a willing sacrifice of those things that we love about ourselves, of those things that we love about our peculiar little habitations of body. We have to sacrifice that to the understanding of something which is beyond that. So it gives you some kind of an idea of what is the act of actually of enjoying something made by another person. It's easily to begin with, of course, we know something about the other person because we see what the person made on choice, made choice on value. But to be able to understand the whole thing, of course, it's not going to happen. That's why that story is a parable. Let's look at the next. And of course, the tradition that we're all familiar with, the great tradition of the Western world from the time of the Renaissance, it was, as I said to you when we were talking about that before, to be able to conceive of the human being in the first place on a very splendid scale, somewhat in the same way the Greeks did, and make that human being able to inhabit a real world and move easily in it. I mean, if he's a god, he can move through the air. If he's a human being, he can stand firmly and have a shadow. The whole thing that we call reality, or we call an idealized reality, or anything, but we feel that it's, and we still feel that, even though the tradition, of course, is at the present time under very serious attack. But to be able to make figures which we recognize those as a possible human figure, beautiful and extraordinary, but possible. And the weaving together of these figures, the ease with which they move through the way we think of them as surrounded by air, having a kind of breathing space and movement and all these things. These are part. Let's look at the next one. A little detail that you can see. And this is created in part by light and shade. We actually see the forms of solid because of the diffusion of light and shade over them. And it makes something which is very convincing. I mean, it's extremely convincing. And of course, wherever it appeared, it began to undermine other people's idea of what to do about art. Let's look at the next one. Now, I'm going to show you a great parade of things. Now, one of which is really like any of the others. And yet, here they are. First of all, their limit is the tradition. And the second is their limit is subject matter, because I'm showing you just Madonna and child. And I could do this for 3 days in succession and never use up all the Madonnas and childs that we have in the slide collection, much less in the whole world, because it's naturally, wonderfully, you see, everybody has been a baby. There's no question. You might have been any number of things, but you were for sure a baby. And the whole trauma and difficulty of being a baby still lies inside of you someplace. So babies are always interesting, as something whose experiences we all have shared. We all have to share. And think of the terrible things that happen to babies when people start feeding them solid food, and they think they're trying to kill them. Babies always think, when you stuff their mouth with food, that this is a distinctly hostile act. And in another few years, they'll start suing you for baby abuse. Made me eat something solid. It's a very, and we all have this, you see. We all have that experience. We've had the experience of warm diapers from peeing on ourselves. We've had every baby experience that there ever was, because we were babies, every one of us. Now, the Madonna child goes throughout. I want you just to look and sit back and not try to think of anything and just look. Let's look at them now. And just go through at a pretty fast rate, if you will. Next one, I'm not going to say that. You can. When I said about the possibility of things. If there's a strong tradition, the possibilities are in it are enormous. I mean, they become, as you can see, just by the, you know, whoops, that's better. You know. Okay. Just notice the baby's getting bigger. The baby grows between the 14th and 15th century about 4 years. That's not much for a century, but it's quite a lot in terms of the change. He's gotten little, but he's more of an adult, I think. Reading anyway. Okay, click. The baby's getting restless, isn't he? He's starting to make a tax on mama. Every single inch of this is chosen, every single inch. And because it's chosen, then we can judge it. We can say, that wasn't a good choice. That was better. Got an apple for us. Okay, next one. Next. This one's going to get away, you know, so it's that wonderful. And this one, of course. Okay, now I want you to go backward as fast as you can. Does your little machine want to do that? So you see them? No, it's like that fast. Oh, I gave you a see it, we're not that quick. That's better. Now, that's it. Oops, that went forward. I'm sure that all of you have one that you like better, or 2 or 3 that you like better than the others. You should be why? Because they represent something that's more agreeable to you. Maybe any number of things which make this distinction. You might, for instance, find this one unattractive. So this is actually a Byzantine one which, though it's late in time, relatively 15th century, it's still is using exactly the same pattern that it's been using for now 1,000 years at this time. And it's always the pattern of this very strong treatment of almost like mental treatment of the draperies, and the child always perfectly conscious, grown up, with like a grown person, even though it's tiny. I mean, but there's nothing babyish about it, not at all. And of course, this was part of just because if you really believe in the Trinitarian idea that Jesus is an aspect of God the Father, or is a part of God, a person within the image of God the Father. You don't like to think the world is in the hands of a little real baby. I mean, you like this. This is really his doctrinal nature, not that they're interested in something which is a doctrine, not something which is an ordinary human. Let's look at the next one. And of course, it held to that idea, and of course, they continue to see that. That lasts really through the 15th century almost. And here the child is perfectly aware and conscious, but somewhat more babyish. Let's look at the next one. And there it's even more so if we can see it. But still, it's able to make a blessing. It actually is folded in the gold background, which was like the mind of God, that had no kind of shadow and no kind of anything except its own golden nature. And so here that constitutes the world in which this is seen. So that begins to soften. Let's look at the next slide, and then it begins to get even more so. And though the Madonna may stay somewhat strong within a kind of image of something iconic, the infant begins to become a human child. And let's look at the next one. Just go on. This is not Frantelico, but by his nature, though he lived in the 15th century and everybody else was being experimental and doing all kinds of things, he was really a devout person who believed in this, in the vision of the Madonna child, and believed that it was something which was eternal and not something in time, not something which was subject to daylight and distance and all of the things which occupy the world. Let's look at the next one. And here, there's really an effort made to combine, and this is by Rubens, of course, in the 17th century, where it's not an ordinary world. It's an extraordinary world, you see, in which the Madonna is surrounded by roses and and is held within the frame of roses. So she is a sweet human being, and the child is too. Let's look at the next one. But see, all of this still goes back to the sense of kingship, back to the idea of power and dominance of the Virgin and of the child. Let's look at the next one. And of course, this means that each of these things was chosen. I mean, this particular, one of the things which happens is that people begin to conceive of the Virgin as being sorrowful. And so that removal from any kind of world, she begins to be engaged in the world and is sorrowful. And because she can see what's going to happen. And the child begins to be sorrowful. So that the whole world changes. And the things that seem real, the things which are the values that the artist the person who's making this has to have. I mean, you cannot make anything unless you have some system of value. You cannot do it. It may be an unsystematic system, but it's still, you have to have it, because otherwise you can't choose. And if you can't choose, you can't make anything, because it just sprawls in front of you. So the choices change, and the choice now is toward something which is sorrowful. Let's look at the next one. And then this is an artist who didn't quite understand that, but could see something about it. And so he became obsessed by draperies, as you can see. He was absolutely, he couldn't see anything except the drapery. And the people are just devoured by what they're wearing. Let's look at the next slide. See, he did that. He's thinking he's doing it something that's absolutely like the tradition demands. But he wasn't. He was doing something that became involved with his choices and his interests. And of course, if you are a painter, you get absolutely absorbed in the mystery of drapery. How to make it seem like it's really drapery. And this poor man certainly was so consumed. There's more blooming ladies. Let's look at the next. meeting children. There, you see that's the Virgin Child in St. John, and that's such a marvelous St. John. And there's this little impish figure here. What makes it possible for somebody to accept that as St. John? And we know he was a baby, like all of us at one time. But I don't think he was quite as impish as this. I think he was thinking about other things. Let's look at the next. This again is an artist who has seen Italian things and doesn't know exactly how it's done. But he tries his best. And what happens is you get these little sort of Sumi wrestler babies. The northern artist always saw the infant Christ child as an absolutely scrawny creature, the scrawniest imaginable. And then they saw what the Italians were doing in the 15th and 16th century, and what they saw looked fatter to them than it was, because they'd been thinking skinny so hard that normal looked fat, and so then they begin to swell up, puff up, balloon up. So look at that arm, that's just bad news. Let's get this off the screen. And there's another, this is bio. I've tried to use painters whose names you wouldn't know or care about for the most part. This is one that you might know, and I don't think that he did it, because I don't blame him for that child. I do not blame him for that child. I think that child is dreadful. And it's like it's really, let's look at the next one. This is not that much better, but you can see. What I want you to do is look at this and figure out one of the things that people at this time, and in the image of the Madonna child, they want to emphasize the closeness of the Madonna and the child. In the very early things, that wasn't necessary, because it was, people knew at that time, it didn't have to be emphasized. And gestures to make that closeness become extremely dangerous, because they can be absurd. Now let's look at the next one. And if you think that this person was successful in choosing this way of showing the relation of the child and Madonna, it's ridiculous, But if you at that time your concentration isn't on that, then you can accept this. And of course, this was very widely accepted. This is again a northern painter who's trying to be Italian, and what he sees is not what is there. He sees the opposite of what he was, and so he tries to show that. And this gesture is very. Let's think of the person who chose it. Now you see, he had this panel in front of him. He's going to make a Madonna child. He said, "How nice it would be if the child were puckering up its lips and kissing on its mother. That would be nice." And so he sets out and does that. Well, it isn't. I mean, the truth is that if you want, I mean, what is it that the artist does? The artist reveals to us something which both we do but didn't know as thoroughly, or we didn't know and need to know and want to know. And if he reveals something to us, and this is what he does, this is what people, I think, mistakenly call creativity. It is revelation that the artist is doing. And if he reveals the relation between the mother and child, exactly as an actor, he has got to get the finest and the most profound and the most satisfactory that he can imagine, and far more satisfactory than we were able to imagine before we saw his thing. See, what the artist has to do is be better at this than we are. And if he's worse at it, then finally people will say, "This won't do." They just won't, or they'll just, relegate him to something else. Let's look at the next one. There's another. You see, that baby has got no body at all. I mean, no actual middle to it. but it's got those great Italian legs. And one of the things which the northern artists, and this is so fascinating, history of art so interesting if you really look at it and enjoy it, is that they always had something weird going on with feet. And if you see this baby's feet, they're very, what's he doing there? How does it? It's a very strange thing. And yet, this is, I could show you feet you wouldn't believe it. At the same time, let's look at it. And quite literally, you wouldn't believe it. But he believed it. This is quite an ingratiating little child, I think, but not on a very exalted level. Let's look at the next one. And this, I mean, really, if your imagination can do better than that, then you found this quite nice. And that has, of course, marvelous kind of severity and the separateness of the mother and child, but not suitable. And gradually, this becomes something which really people don't believe in the divine by the time you paint something like this. And because this is just exactly like somebody who's invited the neighbors in to see her child, and she's trying to look like an ordinary person, and the child, the only thing that remains is that he has a gesture. But beyond that, and it's a kind of explanatory gesture. It's not a gesture of blessing, which was used a long time, but it becomes something which is ordinary, not ordinary, but because it's dignified, but it is still another kind of vision, which doesn't take into account the mystery of being. It takes into account the mystery of divine being. And that says it can be like a child you see. Let's look at the next one. It's just a more charming version of the same thing. Let's look at the next one. And here this child is really getting clear out of hand. I think she's very patient with it, but still, it's an ordinary child. It's not an ordinary fat child. It's actually a monstrous fat child. It's a terrible thing if you use that as a divine image, because it would fill your mind with monstrous fat children, rather than anything having to do with the true nature of mother and child. And this one becomes even more wonderfully playful and nice, but hardly. This could not work as a thing to concentrate the mind on the nature, double nature of Christ, the divine nature and the human nature. It could not work to do that. And if that's what that's for, then it is. Now, it's not working. If, however, it simply is an engaging and pleasing and playful image of a mother and her child, and the love between them and the playfulness of that, it's sort of catch me if you can feeling, that's the children always have, they adore to run and say, catch me. And let's look at the next one. And this has always been one of my favorites, because not only does the child look dead, which may be intentional, because there's always a sense that this reflects the pietà of the Madonna with the dead Christ on her lap. But the Madonna herself is so marvelously and totally removed from any kind of concern, and all of the people that are trying to get into the scenes are crowding each other to such an extent that your feeling is one of extreme discomfort, and you may wonder who is down there. So this has that thing that I talked about before, kind of an urge towards something which is chaotic, or inscrutable, that is avoiding what could be simple. And then when you add to that is a gesture. Her gesture is a gesture of complete self-absorption. And in fact, if you do that, you'll feel that way. Just all you have to do is put your hand. And furthermore, if you do that when you're talking, talking to somebody, they think that's what it is. There's no question, because that is what it means. And it's what it directs the attention to yourself, but it does it in this and of course if you have it, she has a long neck. There's nothing like a long neck to make something look cool and elegant and withdrawn, or withdrawn up or something. Anyway, it is an attribute that those of us who have short necks can never achieve. So it is just by having that and having those shoulders, which makes the neck look longer, and then having this attitude, I mean, the child might as well be dead. I mean, she's got a dysfunctional family. Let's look at the next one. You have the detail of her. You know, she spent more time on her hair, picking up her hair, and her dress. I noticed that marvelous garment that she's wearing. Than she ever spent on her child. I think the photographer just handed her the child after she arranged herself. Let's look at the next one. It's going to be a terrible thing to look at it a long time, because we're affected by what we looked at a long time. It turns all around. It makes things real for us that weren't real. And it's a terrible danger, a terrible power. I'm going to show you a few by the same man. His name is Dirk Bouts. Wonderful name. He couldn't have been named better. His mother must have foreseen his whole life. Because it is a sharp, hard Dutch name. Dirk Bouts, and you say it, and you feel just like his paintings, which always have this wonderful kind of hardness and kind of frozenness. But beneath it they have something which is very touching or very moving. I mean, you can look at it a long time. And I'm going to show you only a few of his, and I'm also going to tell you that in New York, at the present time, the Metropolitan, they have a whole show of Dirk Bouts' Madonna and Child, because he painted, X number. There is no way to figure how many. And if he painted one which was successful, then he painted a dozen, just exactly as much. I say exactly like, but you and I know it's not exactly like. It is nearly like, but so near that, and of course it's much easier to copy your own work than it is to copy someone else's. So let's look at these pretty rapidly, and you get to see what. Let's look at the next one. That's funny little shutdown. That's my favorite one. Let's look at that in a second. It's so engaging, such a special way. And not the way you could ever imagine yourself, It's a really very special vision. Let's look at the next one. Oh, that's an allegory that I just want to include because it is in the same kind of preoccupation with the decorative quality. Let's look at the next one. Oh my. Oh dear. Can we straighten that out just for this is also Madonna and Child, and I just show it to you to conclude our Madonnas and Child. You can you take it off and turn it right side up, because God knows that you can't see it at all sideways. Right side up, you can scarcely see it. So, but I wanted to give you a concluding jolt on the Madonna and Child. What within the tradition, you see, perfectly extraordinary and strange things can be done by the artist. Because he's sure that you have a certain understanding, you see, because he is secure in the knowledge that you share a whole great number of choices. And therefore, he can add and subtract and do, it's a playground that is possible for him. Here's a wonderfully elaborate and strange Madonna Child of Saints. Let's look at the next one. Now, I also want to show you another thing, which again is a matter of the choosing, which the artist chooses. And I'll use the same subject matter. This is the subject matter of Susanna and the elders. You remember that Susanna was a very beautiful woman who was having a bath and had her servants bringing her all of her bath and everything, and the elders of the society saw her and told her and wanted to rape her or wanted to lie with her, and they said, if you won't do it, if you won't do the compromise thing, we'll say that you're a prostitute and you solicited us. Well, fortunately, she was saved from that, but that theme is used again and again. It's a profitable story in the Bible, and this is what Tintoretto. And you see what you get is this marvelous feeling of the voluptuousness. You see why the poor old elders couldn't resist her. I mean, she's not meant to be resisted. I mean, the only thing that we know is, of course, that she was not conscious of it. She was not doing this consciously. But her own voluptuousness and her beauty makes the thing meaningful at one level. And that then the elders have take on a kind of, and you see they're peeking around the corner here. They take it, the thing becomes meaning. It means something. It means that there is such a thing as beauty and voluptuousness and charm of women, which is so powerful that it overthrows moral action. And Tintoretto sees that and makes it believable. And the core of it becomes believable by the marvelous delight that he feels, that Tintoretto feels in painting. Again, you see, choosing this wonderful paleness of the body and this whole, which implies that it's very rarely totally undressed. And everything about it has that great seduction, the quality of the seduction of the body, of the human body. Let's look at the next slide. I have a little detail of it, which you can see this is darker than it should be. But she's perfectly unconscious of it. Let's look at the next. Now this is a painting by a northern. It's the same subject matter. And it take you a while to find Susanna. That's the elders. And why? Because this is a man named Al Gorman, who was a man that was the first person ever to paint a landscape in the Western world. And so where was his real? What was going on? And he was choosing his landscape, and he just loved this. And so he gets this whole marvelous world with the most fantastic architecture which never existed anywhere, you see. And that is in the distance, and this of course done where there weren't any mountains, anything like that, and that's the kind of Alp view. And then here, right down in the foreground, you have Susanna and her servants fixing up the bath, and they're going up the stairs. Now I'll show you. And you know what's going on that looks like some wonderful hotel, with a place to eat outside. And there's a great imagining of architecture. Let's look at the next bit. I have several details of this, and when you get it down, you can see a little bit, but not necessarily a great deal. You see how much he wanted to put into this, and really what a failure of an idea that was. You have to search out what's going on, and once you've searched it out, you can't think of much of the elders, because not much is going on. I mean, it wasn't worth breaking their moral conclusions for this Susanna. Let's look at the next one, a little detail of it. She's having her feet washed. Well, right away, that is different from the Tintoretto. I mean, you couldn't be farther from it. You don't even see her. She's not by any manner of means nude. She's totally covered up and has her hair all around her and everything. It's not a seductive scene. You can't quite forgive the elders if this turns them on to such a degree. What was the rest of their life? Whereas with the Tintoretto, it's the opposite. You say, I can understand that, I understand that. Let's look at the next one. It's very charming. These things individually are very charming. when you get to see them, when you get to actually see them. Let's look at the next thing. Now there's another sixth class. Well, what's the peacock doing there? Everything, the imagination is as vulgar as you could ask for. It is really a terrifyingly heavy, vulgar vision. And you think that Susanna must have arranged this. I mean, there's no sense of any kind of innocence, there's no sense of any kind of anything. Actually, she's kind of leering up at the poor elders. And even her dog isn't barking at them, it's not. and then that use of Cupid, it gives it a whole, another kind of erotic, but erotic in terms of Cupid feeling, which is not, it has no instructional value, whatever. Let's look at the next one. The next even worse one. It's also by the same man, you'll notice this is his dog, and he's always she's watching her even, and it's far less desirable object than even the one with outdoor. Let's look at the next one. And the elders are so terrible. Oh. And here's another where, this person, you see, would stripped everything away and felt that by just coming right down to this, which is the encounter of Susanna and the elder, that this gives it a power, but which it really, it turns out not to have, partly because the gesture is a bad gesture, exactly as it would be on the stage. The gesture of Susanna. And their gestures are not that much better. It has I don't know how to describe it. It's more than vulgarity. It's a kind of diminution of the imaginative power. Let's look at the next one. And then I show you the Rembrandt, because it's unlike any of the others. It's exactly the same theme, within the same tradition. But Rembrandt sees her as innocent, and he's able to make us feel her as innocent. Partly because her body is not that seductive thing that Tintoretto saw. And the whiteness of it, and the delicacy of it, and the sense of her weakness, or her helplessness, or vulnerability, is simply powerful. That there she is. And the people, the elders, are now, they're half regretful. There's not. You can feel that it isn't that lip-licking kind of lasciviousness that those others have. It's something entirely different, and Susanna herself, and the way she looks at it, is a look of people who have been betrayed, and she has been betrayed. Let's look at the next one. I have another wonderful series which you can think again of how the artist chooses within, if he's trying to stick absolutely to a tradition, his choices make it always perfect. And one of the themes is the Sleeping Venus. And this is a Giorgione Sleeping Venus, where everything of the world itself has the quality of dream. And it has the quality of remoteness. It's completely without any kind of sexual voluptuousness. There's a voluptuousness to it. It's a voluptuousness of the beauty of the body and of the beauty of the man. But it's no, partly because she really is asleep. And there is then that sense of being cut off, being not in a way responsible. And let's look at the next one out of the tail of her head. And the green landscape behind it. It's one of, you see, this is what you couldn't have imagined. Because this is a classical head, classical body, and the whole thing sunk in dream. Let's look at the next. And then only a few years later, you see what's happened as the world has become so much more important than any kind of a dream. And this is a great Titian sleeping Venus, and he's using it almost exactly, I mean, perfectly conscious of the Georgian, perfectly conscious of the one he just saw. But saying there's something else. His choices, his values are toward something which is flirtatious, something which is more like the Venus that we think of as a playful goddess and as a very even frivolous kind of figure. And here she is. Just think of what the effect of having a little lap dog at the end of the bed has on changing what Venus is. See, that it's a perfectly delightful little family, but it isn't suited to a sleeping Venus. If you put that dog in the other picture, the whole thing would fall apart. Because it's another vision, it's another system of values, another faith, really, faith in the world in which Venus is perfectly aware of, looks you right in the eye. And at the same time, her hand, which is on her genitals, in the Georgionic, because she was asleep, had no such meaning. But now that she's awake, it has no. And these are all things which have to be chosen within not only the tradition, you see, but within this subject and within actually the pattern that has been chosen in this subject. And let's look at the next one. She's perfectly engaging, strong person. Let's look at the next slide. I'll show. Now, this poor soul saw those reproductions of them and decided to make a sleeping Venus of his very own. And it is, when you see it, you see what he saw because he considered this successful. If he hadn't considered it successful, we wouldn't see it. It would have been not only he, but plenty of other people after him, and so it's still here. It is. Let's look at him. He was so engaged with this image of the sleeping Venus or the awake Venus. Let's look at the next one that he couldn't stop making. Now there's some feet for you, Not to say that most deplorable thing, which is the extremely scrawny leg, another fat thumb. Let's look at the next one, because I could go on showing it doesn't, so I'm going to show you only two. And the next one. And this is later, but the same, perfectly, really a deeply materialistic, heavy vision of Venus sleeping. She even has a whole lot of other ladies sleeping around with her. And not to mention dogs with fleas and, humans. The scene is suddenly crowded, with a whole lot of really not very prepossessing folks. And what on earth, again, looking at this one, how would this have any kind of power to evoke the meaning of erotic love? Let's look at the next one. And then, of course, the modern one of Manet's, which was taken directly and for the same reason from the Titian that you saw. And what does she become? First thing, she's not even attempting to have to be any kind of a divine figure. And she's not even attempting to be terribly voluptuous or attractive. She's demanding. And there's, of course, the whole thing has a kind of coldness and automatic quality, and all the gesture and everything. Chosen. Let's look at the next one. Now, the artists of the present day who are really a very strongly didactic lot. And I can show you in the work of Warhol. Warhol was the most, Andy Warhol, was the most intent on telling people what art is, mainly by saying what it isn't. So that in his revelation, he's trying to reveal what the thing about our world, which aims to be endlessly repeated things, the whole business of the Industrial Revolution, actually cannot be that because each one of those things is really a unique thing. And no matter how you line them up, and no matter how they look on a grocery shelf, or no matter anything, their uniqueness is the thing which you can see if you look closely. It takes looking. And he shows us, sometimes obviously and sometimes not, but he shows us that these things are really unique things. And that what we have thought that the artist was doing, expressing himself, has absolutely nothing to do with it. And in the next one, which is again, I think familiar to you, he hasn't touched it, you know. He has chosen the image of Marilyn Monroe and sent it out to a silk screen company that's in the business of making silk screen, and orders this silk screen of it and sells it then as his work. Because what he's saying is the artist is unimportant, really. The artist is the channel through which things are moved, and don't look for it to be something which is made by his hand or something which is, because it doesn't matter whether he makes it actually himself. It will always be unique. It will always, it is impossible for it not to be. So that isn't important. And what is important then becomes what a revelation that the artist makes. And he's revealing in all of the things that he does, he's trying to reveal the necessary, the true anonymity of the art. Not something which is a great creative act, and not something which is so personal. In fact, it can be absolutely, and for many civilizations it's been desirable that it should be totally impersonal. Almost all of the art in the world is anonymous. At any period. Let's look at the next one. And Roy Lichtenstein is equally intent on telling you what art is and what isn't. And he's telling you that once a tradition exists, or even a style within the tradition, as the style of Cubism, then anybody can do it. Anybody. Because it's always something which is impossible for anybody to do. But for anybody to do it well is another question. And so it's exactly like anything else. It's what we do well. What is something farther than what the people who look at it had imagined before or were able to imagine ever. And so he calls this cubist flower arrangement. Let's look at the next one. And this is my favorite, which is called modern painting. See, you have to know what that means. No matter where you live, you know, I don't know when, 1,000, 2,000 years from now. What does this mean? It means that what we call modern painting has become so rigid and so clear in what it requires and what it refuses. And again, in choosing, you see, what are its values? One of its values is a kind of harshness, and exactly or a brutality of vision, which is part of our modern life. And there's nothing more hostile and more brutal than architecture of the present time. It doesn't even know that it is. I mean, it can be a factory where no one is thinking, I'm going to make a brutal statement. I mean, there's the architecture of the present time. Choose brutality as one of the virtues which they want their building to have. Exactly as rock singers do, exactly as almost anything in the modern world does. But to make a painting, now this is the kind of painting, of course, that we know everybody living at the present time who is in any way conscious of what's going on. I mean, streets of Phoenix, anything, knows that this is a modern painting. And if you wanted to have, in a comic strip, you wanted to show that the people were very modern and fancy, you'd have exactly this on the wall, or a version of it. And then that would signal everybody, these are modern people, and they want modern paintings, and there it is. And it's the same if you were decorating a house or whatever you were doing. What you're doing there is making making a choice that says modernism, a choice that says what that is has to do with a kind of depersonalized brutality. And it has to do with something which is dangerous. I remember years ago hearing some sculptors complaining. At that time, sculpture was still quite traditional, and it was described, by people as what you back into when you're looking at paintings in a museum. And this offended these sculptors a great deal, naturally. And they were talking about how you could make sculpture more dangerous, so that you would dare back into it. You see, it would fall on you, or drop a knife in your head, or do something that would get your attention and hold it. And of course, that's part of what the whole thing is, you see, because we live in such a crowded world that to get attention is extremely difficult. And certainly very difficult for somebody just sitting on a wall as a painting, or sitting in a room as a sculpture. Because there's so much going on. There's so many things, and so many, whatever. The world is crowded with things. And to get attention requires maybe something which is desperate. And it has an element of desperation. But it's chosen. And it's chosen through values. Thank you very much. Ritualistic theism. I said I brought there's some things to put stuff on that I'm delighted because I have a Han dish painted by Han artists, or rather a silk screen of Han artists, painted and sold by Cost Plus. And I have a nice tin ring. And what I love about that plate is not only that it's tin and crossed like a dollar, but on the back they're scrupulous to tell you exactly what it is. They say this is a perfect copy of a Ming plate, giving you the date and they can't wait to instruct you about this as well as present you with this wonderful Ming object, which could be, of course, farther from the original. I mean, it's totally different material, differently made, everything. But they're going to make sure you know that you're not just eating out of some old tin plate down there. You're eating out of a Ming ceramic, or ceramic. I think they're the most entertaining. I once had a wonderful bowl from China, tin bowl, which had ladies on tractors as a decoration all around. You didn't notice at first, you just see these little things you see going on. You looked at them, there were ladies on tractors. And I'm sorry to say, gone away somewhere. It was not recognized by other people as an extraordinary object of great value. It's true of practically everything I have. So, I do, however, want to tell you something, which is that I love to wear beautiful things, and I've treated all of you to three. One from Morocco, the first one, the second one from Yemen, a dress that I had on last time, yellow dress, and it's about 100 years old. And therefore I have a great respect for it. It's a thing of great beauty and of extraordinary. And you think of the people who've been in it. It had things along the side so you could be either fat or thin. They didn't care. I mean, it was that wonderful one size fits all, but it was one beauty fits nothing but beauty, which is what it was. And then this, of course, is Chinese. So I want you, please, to go out knowing that there is no such thing as isolation as long as we are the same species, a thing called a human being. and that we love very much the same things exactly as we eat very much the same thing, and exactly as we sleep in very much the same way. I always think of the poor ladies who were the ladies of the warlords of China, the samurai ladies. They were not allowed to sleep in but two positions. And we started training them. You see, when they were very tiny, exactly as they were binding their feet, doing everything else perfectly, yes, they could make them into monsters. So the nurse would arrange them. If they got out, you know, if they moved an arm over here, back it would go, until they slept, as a samurai lady should sleep. So all kinds of things are possible, many not desirable. Thank you. That's enough.